The East Ward Master Plan Project is a 6-month community-based initiative based in the East Ward. It's funded by the City of Winston-Salem, facilitated by the S.G. Atkins Community Development Corporation and Air St. Gross Architects. On this edition of the East Ward Update, we'll hear from Carol Davis of the Simon Green Atkins Community Development Corporation. Carol, it's great to have you back to talk about what's going on and the great work S.G. Atkins is doing and the master planning process that's currently underway in the community. Knowing where we are now in this master planning process, there's been so much work that's happened prior to us even getting to this point. A lot of it, S.G. Atkins has been engaged in, particularly in the area where the master plan concentrates its efforts, which is the area bounded by Martin Luther King to the east and US 52 to the west. And the master plan kind of takes a look at this area and how the community and neighborhood itself can reimagine itself to benefit from all the rest of the development that's going on in the community. But tell me some of the things that S.G. Atkins has been doing prior to this. You know, this isn't the first thing that's happened in this community, but you, who've been working with S.G. Atkins for 16 years, have had your fingerprint on a lot of things that's been going on in the community. Just talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been engaged in so far.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you for your partnership and your strong leadership in the ward. I don't think this would be happening without you being out front, really pushing this opportunity that we have. And as you know, Winston-Salem State is grounded there. You know, the founder of Winston-Salem State created the original neighborhood, and and that's who we're named after as the Simon Green Atkins CDC. And so, you know, we're just trying to make sure that the community has an opportunity to benefit in the economic development that's going on all across the city, and that some exciting things can happen right, you know, at the university's front door, between the university campus and downtown. And so some of the things that we've been involved in the past, as you know, we've done some single-family housing, and we've also been engaged in some planning of an overlay district along the Martin Luther King corridor. And the reason we got involved with the overlay district is because we anticipated that one day there'd be an opportunity for some new development. And we wanted to set some guidelines, some design guidelines that could just steer the look, create a nice aesthetic for the area, and making sure that pedestrians were considered, that we'd have nice sidewalks, and that there'd be some greenery, and that the buildings would be situated near the curb, and signage would look a certain way. So we did that overlay planning, and this is kind of a next step.
Yeah, I think it's important to have somebody like yourself who sits in the driver's seat and helps steer you know, the ship consistently. You know, myself as an elected official and others who serve, sometimes we can come and go. But to be able to have someone who can really be consistent in that work, I say thank you for that work, because I think that is very, very important. Because I think it's an example of the fact that much of the things that neighborhoods and communities desire is not something that's going to happen overnight. But the type of impacts that neighborhoods and communities want sometimes takes some time. And to be able to have someone who knows how things were, how things are changing, and what the vision is for the future, I think is important to be able to get to that destination in the long run. And as you mentioned about the overlay district and that impact, I think that that's important in terms of having guidelines and standards so that development itself has an opportunity to follow a particular set of rules. I think that's an important piece of the puzzle.
Yes, and so one of the things that we know is coming is with the closure of Business 40 for a couple of years, we figured that that will create a lot more traffic on the Martin Luther King corridor, and we want to be ready for that. And we think that with more traffic, there's even more opportunity for development, for getting some products and services along that corridor in strategic areas. And there are some key pieces of property on the MLK corridor that could be optimized, you know, that are underutilized, and that we really want to see from this process some investment that's really going to benefit the whole community.
Yeah, you all were also a part of a process of really looking at the corridor, the MLK corridor itself, and even identifying what's called catalytic projects, projects that have the opportunity to help kickstart and catalyze other development within the area. What are some of those projects?
Well, obviously we know Winston-Salem State is the anchor. That is the MLK corridor anchor, and they're about to invest $50 million more in the campus, creating a nice new science facility. But up on the north end of MLK, in addition to the planning that's already been done by the Housing Authority, there's the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School and the county complex that's there on North Martin Luther King. Down on the south end of Martin Luther King, we now have the Enterprise Center as you go toward Walltown Street, and that business incubator now it has 40 businesses and residents there that are creating income and creating jobs for people and their families. And then in the center, again, now we have Union Station under development. Thanks to your leadership there, we've got a $17 million investment in Union Station. It'll be, again, a multimodal transportation center at some point, and there's some commercial opportunity there for development. So, I think there's some pretty strong anchors emerging on the MLK corridor.
And I think it's important for people to understand those projects and the investments that have been made, much of whom has been on the public side of things, but often those are the projects that help show other private developments the sustainability of other type of projects in the community, because especially in neighborhoods and communities that have had economic challenges, sometimes it's hard to pull in folks to make long-term investments because they're questioning how they get their return on investment, making those investments in other communities. I'm one that argue, they say no matter what the economic challenges in that community, every neighborhood deserves investment. And I think that we're demonstrating with many of these projects that fact to be true, that all communities are primed for investment, and if you give neighborhoods and communities a chance, things can be successful in those communities. So when we look at Union Station, and that is a catalytic project which I'm excited about to see moving forward, it stands on one side of a community that's a part of this process that we're looking at in master planning. And when we think about master planning and we think about this process that has started, now it's important for individuals to understand who's pushing this, who's at the forefront of trying to see how this happens. And so this process started actually probably about 2 years ago in getting together with stakeholders in the neighborhood. I know I called a meeting some time ago at United Metropolitan to talk with major landowners in the community, large stakeholders, whether they were pastors of churches or citizens in the community, to come together and just talk about their intentions and plans in the neighborhood. And I think there have been conversations that happened before that, but I think that was a start for people to really begin to think about what was going on, what was happening. And at the core of it, for me, it was around how do we make sure that the neighborhood, how do we make sure that people who are here have a real voice in what happens in their community. Because of the prime location of where this neighborhood is, most people can imagine that in the future the neighborhood could look different. And my biggest fear, which I consistently have brought up in the conversations, is to make sure that we don't gentrify neighborhoods to an extent where people who desire and want to live in the community have absolutely no choice to be there. And also that they're not a part of the economic vitality. For if neighborhoods are going to be lifted, why shouldn't the people who live in that neighborhood benefit from the financial investments in the neighborhood and the living conditions of the community as well?
Right, I've heard you make that point many times. And so, when we had a community meeting recently and people believed the opposite, it kind of hurt my feelings, because I've always heard you say that. And that's why we had so many focus group meetings and community meetings, giving people an opportunity to provide their input, because we want to hear what's on people's minds. Even if they don't own property, we know that they live there, You know, they've rooted their lives in the community, and we want that to remain intact. So, you know, part of the way we can address that is through planning and just getting everybody's ideas into the vision.
Right.
And you've consistently done that, and so I think that we'll benefit from that. And there's room for everyone to be part of the community at different price points. You know, we've talked about having housing at various price points so that you can have a diverse group of residents in the community and keep those who are already there. You know, the last thing we want to do is beautify the area and then have people who are currently living there not be able to afford to enjoy the benefits. And so you've been consistent with that, and that's at the top of our priority list.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, and I believe it in the process. So before we jump into some of the specifics of the master plan, there's one other plan that's taking place in the Creative Corridor. Coalition has been a part of that, and they focus more so on the aesthetics of the Martin Luther King corridor, and we'll see probably by mid-year to end of this year some design that will come before council and approvals for that project to get started. But pretty much it will be a aesthetic transformation that will happen along Martin Luther King corridor, whether we're talking about fencing, signage, looking at opportunities to recognize individuals in community in different ways through monuments of some sort. And I know S.G. Atkins has also participated in that process as well. But I know that the Creative Corridors Coalition has been kind of taking the lead on some of the artistic expressions that the state and city are going to be putting dollars to help make happen. And I think, again, that will be another piece that I think will help tie neighborhoods and communities together, because for so long, 52 has stood as one of two things. It has stood as a physical barrier, and it has stood as a mental barrier to some individuals in terms of what's happening in different parts of the community. And actually a third, and I think an excuse. And I think the excuse piece is that I think sometimes, yes, it's a physical barrier and that it's a mental barrier, but then it's an easy excuse why I think some have not taken a step into some parts of the community. I think what we can do with streetscape and landscaping and roadways is to help lessen that divide. So if we're talking about how we blend aesthetics that are happening in downtown all the way through into neighborhoods in the eastern part of the community, now you have streets and roads that while you're driving down them, you don't feel like you're changing neighborhoods and communities, and the people in the eastern part of the community benefit from the same nice look. People in all parts of the community want to live in neighborhoods that look good. And so I think that will help in ways remove some of the barriers. There'll still be physical barriers there, but the biggest one that I think it'll help take away is the excuse. The excuse that you know we can use 52 as a reason why not to invest in some parts of the neighborhood, in some part of our community.
Right. I look forward to seeing, you know, the trees and, you know, some of the historical markers that have been described. I was recently in Charlotte walking down, I think it was College Street, and they had markers in the sidewalk actually engraved with history recorded. Then also there were some markers that were shaped like they were stones, and they had plaques on them, and they were acknowledging the contributions of significant figures in Charlotte history. So I think we certainly can recognize our local heroes in that way. And it provides not just beautification, but, you know, keeps us grounded in where we've come from and reminds people of our rich history.
Yeah. So when people start hearing about master plans and they start hearing about, oh, we're going to have charrettes, or we're going to have meetings and conversations, for many people in some communities, they'll think about, you know, we've met, we have planned, we have planned, and we have met, and we've seen pictures, and we're not seeing all of this stuff come to pass. They've seen the process that the city goes through, which is a part of our legacy process, where that's more specific in terms of helping shape development when private developers come in and want to say that they want to put, you know, a 20 story building in a residential area, and that plan says no, the neighborhood has already said that they want this community to remain residential, that the legacy plan is more so in terms of making sure that the right development happens in the right place. And I think sometimes it's a challenge for community to know that the city's not doing that development but helping to guide it. But when we think about master plans and we think about people coming to all these meetings, sometimes it can be a challenge to help people continue to be enthusiastic about what's going to happen. And I think because we're seeing some of these things come to pass, that hopefully that helps people realize that things are really going to happen. When we think about the Union Station project, that was a long time in the making,
definitely.
and some people probably gave up hope that that was going to happen. But today, we see the work that's taking place there. And so now, when we are looking at this area of community, I think there's probably some same sentiment people are thinking about. But then I think there's also a fear that some people come to the table with that I think is a real fear that has to be acknowledged. And that's a fear that one, thought that maybe nothing will happen, but then the other side is, yes, something will happen, but we won't be a part of it. And I go back to the fact that the reason all of this is happening is to try to ensure that neighbors who live in the neighborhood and the community are a part of that process. So we got to where we are now from having a talk with the Air St. Gross architect firm who've done many master plans all over the country. They came in and met with us probably about a year or so ago to start this process. And we want to talk about what happened in that process.
Right, so we had this was in February 2016, we had about 20 people representing, diverse groups of stakeholders who came together and looked at the maps of the area, talked about the area, and tried to set a vision, just a broad vision for what could happen in the area that would reflect investment, that would, and the kind of investment that would not only change the physical appearance of the area, but would create economic opportunities for the residents. And so from that early session, we looked at the maps of the area, we looked at plans for adjoining areas, and we looked at really what has happened downtown. How did the Innovation Corridor attract investment? How did it grow? What kinds of jobs is it creating? And what can we do on the east side of 52 that will complement that? Are there some gaps in what's going on down there that we can include in our plan that create economic opportunity? So we just got a lot of different voices at the table, and then they synthesized all of that information and came back recently, as you know, to go on a little deeper dive onto what can happen. So we've looked at the strengths, we've looked at the weaknesses, the opportunities, some of the threats, and at the end of the day, we realize there's a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of strengths already in the neighborhood that we can capitalize on. And I think this time is different from what we've done before because we've actually identified people who want to invest and people who understand that we have to be inclusive.
Right. And I think that part of that first conversation, and it was more of a visioning session, I think it really did help set the tone for what to expect as moving into a master plan. And part of that process, at the end of it, they said, well, the community needs to do a full-blown master plan. They need to do a full master plan of this community, of this neighborhood, to really get down into what can be possible. We've got a big vision of what can happen, but if you want to dive deeper, you need to do a full-out master plan. And I think that's where we are now. That's some of the things that are taking place at this point. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. When we return, we'll hear more about the East End Master Plan.
Hello?
Hello, I'm calling about the apartment you have for rent.
It's not available.
This is Shaniqua Johnson. Is the apartment still available?
No, it isn't.
Good morning, ma'am. Is the apartment you advertised still available?
Why, yes, it is.
Fair housing law prohibits housing discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, family status, or disability. If you think you've been discriminated against, call 311 and ask for the Human Relations Department.
We've been talking about the East End Master Plan, and I'm joined again by the Executive Director of SG and CDC, Ms. Carol Davis. We've been having a great conversation about the East End Master Plan and some of the conversation we've been having, how we got to the place we are now, some of the work that SG and CDC has been engaged in, led by yourself, and some of the wins we've had so far in the community and just the time investment that it takes. But I want to jump in a little bit more deeply in what is going on right now, what just took place with the master planning process, and then what can the community expect moving forward in reference to this master planning process. So let's start with what just happened. Recently we had what take place?
Right, so in March we had Air St. Gross come to the community and really spent a full day and a half meeting with focus groups of different constituents from the East End. And so they met with groups of church leaders, groups of residents. We had all of the institutions of higher learning, Winston-Salem State, Wake Forest, Salem College, Forsyth Tech, School of the Arts. They were all represented. We had folks from the housing department at the city and the county, from economic development. We had investors, financial institutions. We tried to include everyone. We wanted to hear what everyone had to say about their thoughts and vision for the East End in the short term and in the long term, because we're looking for projects, catalytic projects that can take place within this targeted area. So at the end of that day and a half, I think we've gathered a lot of information. Air St. Gross has gone back to their offices, and they're synthesizing it all, and they're going to come back and present what they heard from the community in late May, early June timeframe.
Yeah, I think it was important the way those meetings were set up to really have that roundtable discussion from many groups in the area, to hear their thoughts, for some of them to be educated on what is going on, what's not going on in the community. And then some who've been in the neighborhood before and have seen some of the challenges of trying to do things, and I think could offer experiences from the past on what has been barriers to development and growth. And I think that again, the place of having residents and citizens at the table was very, very important, because I think if there's any voice that is probably the most important in this process, is the voice of existing neighborhood people who are living in the community, for them to have a voice in what's going on in the process and how they envision the community moving and thriving into the future. I think that what has taken place thus far is exciting in terms of, and it's good conversation to help think through where we are and where the neighborhood wants to be and how we get there. And I think that's part of the plan. How do we get to what the neighborhood and others have stated they want for themselves? It's one thing to just say this is what we want, but what's the roadmap to actually achieve those goals and get to that place? And as you stated, I think we have some good potential partners at the table, some long-time institutions in the community who have vested interests in the neighborhood and in the people that I think can help lead that process, including Winston-Salem State and even faith-based organizations in the community that can help move us along in that process. As a part of the master planning process and that first time of meeting, there was community forum, a larger community forum opened up to the community for the community to have a larger voice in that process. And so there will be more more opportunities for the community to voice their thoughts, voice their opinions on this plan. One of the things I want people to be very, very clear on is that there's nothing that has been written in stone. There's nothing that has been decided for certain within the master plan. That's the reason for the plan itself. Sometimes, individuals may think that, some may bring a plan already thought out just to get community approval. But this is the opposite of that. This is the community voicing their thoughts to create the plan itself.
Right. So what I heard most clearly from the community is, yes, they want nice places to live in terms of housing. They want that housing to be affordable, and they want to have access to economic opportunity, whether that means jobs or entrepreneurial opportunities. And so I think that I've heard people want access to the training opportunities, to be able to get the skills to run their own businesses. And we had people at the table who talked about, yes, we can make that happen. We can put something in the community, another resource in the community where people can go to learn about opening their own business. And then as part of the plan, perhaps we can put storefronts and retail spaces where people can have a location to locate their business once they've gotten their business plans in order, once they've really thought through their ideas and found financing and can start their own business. So not everyone's going to be able to start their own business, but we need to create those opportunities, plant the seed, so that it's not just jobs that are created, but also opportunities for people to create their own jobs. So that economic development opportunity message is what came through really clearly from the community input session. People wanted to know, where is our equity in this process? We don't own the property that we live in, but where is our equity? We want to be a part. And so I think by creating those opportunities, having that in our minds as we go through this process, is going to be key.
Yeah, I think that's an important point for the community understanding, even when we're engaging with individuals that have potential to invest in the community, that if you want to do development here, then we want to make sure that community people have the opportunity at some of the business opportunities. Yes, we want folks to be employed and have careers in different jobs that may be created, but there's a difference when you have neighbors in the community who have great business ideas and that can be helped develop. And particularly, we have a great partner in this, SGAC and CDC, who's doing some great work down at the Enterprise Center. We have some great businesses that can be developed that can meet the needs of those who are living in the community. Because if you develop, there's going to be additional needs that are there. And we already know that there are needs in the community now from residents that live in the community now who have to leave the neighborhood and the community in order to satisfy those needs and spend those dollars in places that do not recycle back in our communities. Now, we can create the opportunities for those businesses to be developed in this area. Those dollars and the ownership by individuals who live in and around this community, now those dollars that are being spent are being recycled back through those neighborhoods, employment opportunities for people who are living in the community, and that has to be intentional. That doesn't happen by accident. That has to be an intentional part of the process, and I think the neighborhood said that very clearly. I think I'm committed to that, and others in terms of how we push to make that happen. So that means that once certain needs are identified more specifically, that leaves the work of being able to say, okay, how do we help resource those who have these business ideas in the community to take advantage of the opportunity that's going to happen.
Right, and the city already has some resources, and I pointed that out at one of our meetings. The city, you've got your small business development department that does workshops. You do one-on-one assistance with individuals who are working on business plans, and then you have the loan program. You have the business loan program. There's a micro enterprise loan program, and so people need to know what all the
I think
resources already exist.
Yeah.
There are resources that already exist, and then we can just do a better job getting those close to people, making it convenient for them to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, and with this, I think it's a bold opportunity for communities. In order for it to happen, not one group's going to be able to do it all, but it's going to take a collective effort from not only the public sector, meaning government, city, county, but it's going to take private individuals as well as just individual neighbors and community to help make some things happen in this particular area. But I'm excited about the opportunities there. I'm excited about this process, but I want to make sure that the community feels the same type of excitement and how we can help replace that fear with some cautious optimism in terms of the opportunities that will be presented. So as we get ready to wrap up, what are the things that community can expect through this process moving forward? I know you mentioned we had the first phase in March, and then we'll expect here in the future a report back, and then what will take place. Right.
So some of the ways we communicated with people, for one thing, via email and via postcards. We mailed postcards to people's homes, and we met people in different venues and passed out flyers. And so we're going to do that process again and make sure that we get people in the target area information about the next set of meetings and well ahead of time so they can put it on their calendars and be there. So we'll have groups come in again, and again, just get a recap of all the information that was provided next time. And what I expect is that some of our best thinking, some of our better ideas should rise to the top and be highlighted in this next set of meetings, so we can start to all see the vision of how things may emerge in the short term and then over the long term. So what projects might be first, and then what may happen later, and actually who's going to step forward to make those investments, and then we'll just have things just build momentum on each other until we've got all of the key pieces within that target area really planned out and ready for investment.
Yeah, well, it is some exciting times in the city, but even more so, I think it's some exciting times in the eastern part of our community as we begin to think about investment opportunities and how neighborhoods and communities can help lead that process. I thank you for the work SG Atkins is doing and has done for a long time in the neighborhood and community, and that commitment to what's going on in our neighborhoods. And for the future, I think it has not yet been revealed what will be taking place and what will happen, and I encourage neighbors and communities to be actively engaged in the conversation, because I think that's the only way that the sentiments of community can be enumerated in the process. And the goal will be, once a master plan is developed, I want to be able to bring this back to my colleagues on City Council and have this adopted as a master plan that the council reflects on when it's coming and looking at rezoning projects, so that we can have it in the record that this is what the neighborhood wants, this is what the community has decided, and that for the future that this development can reflect all the time and energy that neighbors and others will have put into the process as a whole. So again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next time I come back, we'll be more specific. We'll have some real specific ideas to talk about next time.
Yep, I'm excited about that, and we may have some images and some pictures to show from the master plan itself.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for watching this episode of the East Ward Update. You can see this episode in its entirety on the city's YouTube page, Winston-Salem City Gov. I'm Councilmember Derwin Montgomery.